Picture a prison. Now take away the individual cells. Take away the notion that anyone inside committed a crime. Take away the trial. Take away the lawyer. Take away the date you get out. Now put it in a desert. Not a cinematic desert with rolling dunes and orange sunsets that look good on postcards. A high desert. The Owens Valley, California. 4,000 feet above sea level, wedged between the Sierra Nevada mountains on one side and the Inyo Mountains on the other, so that the wind has nowhere to go except directly through you. A place where summer temperatures hit 110 degrees and winter nights drop below freezing, and the dust is its own entity, its own living force. It gets into your food, your lungs, the corners of your eyes while you sleep. Add guard towers with searchlights. Add barbed wire. Add 10,000 people who 6 months ago were living in Los Angeles and Sacramento and San Francisco and Fresno, running flower shops and fish markets and farms and dental practices. People who were born in California, who went to California schools, who knew the words to the same songs you knew, who had, in many cases, never set foot in Japan in their lives. It is 1942. It is March. Executive Order 9066 has just been signed by President Roosevelt, and the United States government has decided that every person of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast, citizen or not, young or old, farmer or doctor or fisherman or child, is a potential enemy of the nation. They have 10 days, sometimes less. 10 days to sell everything they... or store it somewhere, or simply abandon it, because nobody knows how long this will last or if they'll ever come back. They're allowed 1 suitcase each, sometimes 2. They're going to Manzanar. Now fill that desert prison with kitchens, 36 of them, 1 for every residential block, each one feeding between 200 and 350 people, 3 times a day, with military ration budgets, salvaged equipment, and whatever dignity they can scrape together in a place specifically designed to remind them they have none. That's what this story's about. Not the politics, not the history essay version, not the textbook paragraph that mentions internment between Pearl Harbor and D-Day, and then moves on. This is about the kitchen, the specific kitchen, the smells and the sounds and the weight of the pots and the ache in your hands at 10 o'clock at night, when you've been standing on a concrete floor since 4 in the morning. This is about what it meant to feed people who had lost everything, and to do it with enough care that the food still tasted like something, like home, like the people making it still believed home was a thing worth remembering. We're going there tonight, not as historians looking at photographs in an archive. We're living it. 1 person, 1 kitchen, 1 very long year behind the wire. So, get comfortable. I make these history stories and I have genuinely no idea who's listening at 2 in the morning. Maybe you're someone who fell down a research rabbit hole about Japanese American history and ended up here. Maybe you're someone who just finds the sound of someone talking about the past soothing, which, honestly, fair enough. Either way, subscribe if you want. There's a pillow somewhere. I recommend it. Here we go. Your name is Keiko Yamamoto. You're 22 years old, and you haven't slept properly in 6 weeks. Not since the night your father came home from the hardware store with a look on his face that you'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, something worse, something resigned, like a man who has just been told something terrible and has already decided that crying about it won't help. They want us to go, he said. He didn't say who they were. He didn't need to. That was February 19th, 1942, the day the order was signed. You think about that night a lot, lying here in Barrack 14, Block 7, Manzanar War Relocation Centre, on a canvas army cot that's too short for your father's legs and too narrow for your mother's dignity. The mattress is a ticking sack stuffed with straw, the same straw they gave you when you arrived, told you to find a pile of it near the entrance and stuff your own bedding. Your family of 4, you, your parents, your 17-year-old brother, Darshi, shares a room that measures 20 feet by 25 feet. There are no walls between your cot and your parents' cots. There's a thin sheet your mother hung from a nail as a curtain, and she pretends it's a wall, and everyone lets her because some fictions are necessary. There is a pot-belly stove in the corner. In March, it is not enough. The walls are single-board construction. You can feel the wind come through the gaps between the planks like the desert is trying to breathe on you personally, like it has something to say. Outside, the searchlights sweep in slow arcs across the camp. Every 45 seconds or so, a bar of white light moves across the tar paper walls of your barrack, crosses your straw mattress, crosses your face, and continues on. You are not a prisoner. That's what the official language says. This is a relocation centre, not a prison camp. You are being evacuated, not imprisoned. The people in the guard towers are not there to keep you in. They are there to protect you from hostile elements outside. Every single person in Barrack 14, Block 7, knows this is a lie. But it is March 1942, and arguing about language takes more energy than most people have right now. Your alarm is a wind-up clock your mother brought from home, one of the few things that fit in the suitcase. She wrapped it in a wool sweater to protect the glass face, unwrapped it in the barrack like it was something precious. It is. It goes off at 4:15. The sound is a thin, tinny ring that sounds very loud in the dark. Your father doesn't move. Your brother pulls his pillow over his head. Your mother's already awake. You can tell by her breathing. She's been awake since 3. You get up without turning on the light. You know where everything is. The floor is cold. The boards flex and creak under your bare feet. You locate your shoes by feel, your work clothes by the particular roughness of the fabric. A heavy cotton shirt and loose trousers that weren't yours originally, issued by the camp administration from a pile of donated clothing that smells faintly of someone else's life. You splash water on your face from the basin. The water left in the pitcher overnight is cold enough to hurt. You're a mess hall worker. Specifically, you're a cook in Mess Hall 7, which serves Block 7.5 of Block 8, which means somewhere between 280 and 310 people, depending on the day and who's still sick from the dust storm last week that sent 30 people to the camp hospital with respiratory problems. Your shift starts at 4:30. You have 15 minutes. The walk to the mess hall is maybe 200 feet. In another life, 200 feet is nothing. It's the distance from your bedroom to your kitchen in the house in Boyle Heights. Less. Here, those 200 feet cross open ground that the wind treats as a personal project. In the dark, before dawn, the cold comes down from the Sierra Nevada with a particular intensity, like the mountains are reminding you they've been here a lot longer than you have, and they'll be here long after, and your feelings about the situation are not their concern. The dust is already awake. It is always awake. Fine alkaline dust from the dry lake bed this whole valley used to be, before white settlers diverted the water north to Los Angeles and turned it into what it is now. Dry and unforgiving and full of a particular kind of white powder that gets into the seams of everything. You wrap your scarf around your face, walk fast. The mess hall is a long barrack building, same tar paper and raw lumber as everything else. But from the outside, at 4:30 in the morning, you can already see light through the gaps in the walls, a warm yellow glow, and you can smell it before you even get to the door. You can always smell it before you get to the door. Coal smoke from the cast iron range, lard already heating, the slightly sour smell of yesterday's rice that didn't get fully cleaned out of the bottom of the pot. And underneath all of that, the yeasty, mineral smell of water in a place that has very little of it. Desert water. Water that tastes of the earth it came through. You push the door open. The mess hall kitchen is not designed for what it's being asked to do. It's a room approximately 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The ceiling is maybe 8 feet at its highest. The walls sweat in winter and bake in summer. The floor is poured concrete, unfinished, cold, in a way that travels directly up through the soles of your shoes and into your ankles by around 8 in the morning and doesn't leave until you sit down, which you won't do until after lunch service is cleared. The equipment: 2 cast iron ranges, military surplus, each with 6 burners and 2 ovens. A commercial steam kettle that holds 60 gallons, though one of its valves sticks and you have to hit it with the heel of your hand to get it open. 3 prep tables, also military surplus, aluminum with the dents to prove it. A walk-in cooler that actually works, which makes this mess hall luckier than blocks 9 through 14, where the cooler broke in April and didn't get fixed until June, and the food situation during those 8 weeks was something nobody wants to discuss. And the pots. There are pots you have never seen before. Giant things. 40-quart stock pots. Steam table pans so large you need 2 people to carry them when they're full. Ladles the size of small canoe paddles. Sheet pans so warped they rock on the oven rack. You reach for your apron, hanging on the hook by the door. It was white once. Now it's the particular grey-brown of something washed many times in water that has too much alkaline mineral content and not enough actual soap. You tie it around your waist. Good morning, Manzanar. Mrs. Tanaka is already there. She is always already there. Fumiko Tanaka, 61 years old, from Fresno. She ran a boarding house for 15 years. She has cooked for 30 people at a time and made it look unremarkable. She's standing in front of the larger of the 2 ranges, stirring something in a pot with the unhurried rhythmic certainty of someone who has spent decades deciding that panic is wasteful. She's maybe 5 feet tall. Maybe. Her shoulders are slightly rounded from years of leaning over counters, over ranges, over the particular posture of a woman who spent her whole life producing food for other people and doesn't think this makes her unusual. She doesn't look up when you come in. Keiko-san, the rice hasn't started yet. Not. Good morning. Not. How did you sleep? The rice hasn't started yet. This is how Mrs. Tanaka communicates. In things that need to be done. You've been working for her for 2 months, and you've come to understand that this is not coldness. This is the way a person survives. You don't waste time on things you can't affect. You spend your energy on the things in front of you. The rice hasn't started yet. There are 300 people who will need rice in approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. This is the problem. You go start the rice. The rice at Manzanar is the subject of ongoing and passionate controversy. This sounds like an exaggeration. It is not. For the Issei, the first-generation Japanese immigrants who are, by law, not allowed to become American citizens, rice is not a side dish. Rice is the center. Rice is the thing around which a meal is organized. Not the protein, not the vegetable, but the rice. the particular stickiness of short-grain Japanese rice, the precise ratio of water to grain that produces the right consistency, the specific technique of washing it 3 times before cooking, the way the water runs cloudy and then clear. The WRA, the War Relocation Authority, the government agency running the camp, issues medium grain Calrose rice, which is not the same thing. It produces a different texture. It behaves differently with water. The Issei women in Block 7 have opinions about this that they will share with you at length if you give them any opening at all. But it is what there is. You measure out rice by the scoop. 5-gallon pot filled to the 3rd mark on the inside. Add water. And here you've learned the exact adjustment for the altitude, because the Owens Valley is high desert and water boils at a lower temperature up here, and you have to compensate in the ratio or the rice comes out undercooked. And the first time you made rice here, you got it wrong. And Mrs. Tanaka said nothing but looked at the pot for a long moment in a way that communicated everything. You've gotten it right every time since. The lid goes on. You move the pot to the back burner. Lower the flame to something between medium and low, and set the mental timer that lives in your head now, the one that tracks 15 different things simultaneously. The rice, the miso, whatever protein you have this morning, the vegetables, the state of the steam kettle, the hour, the minute. Kitchen time is not clock time. Kitchen time is 10 things at once. There are 6 of you working this morning. You and Mrs. Tanaka. Then there's Henry Oshima, who is 26 and was studying to be an electrical engineer at UCLA before the order came, and who now works the breakfast line with a kind of quiet anger that he keeps just below the surface most of the time. Sachiko Mori, who is 43 and has a daughter in the camp hospital with a respiratory infection, and who works with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that work is the only thing standing between her and a grief she won't let herself feel yet. Tommy Kato, who is 15 and peels things. Potatoes, carrots, whatever needs peeling. He does it fast. His hands are permanently chapped from the peeler and the cold water and the altitude dryness. And Mrs. Nishimura, who's in her late 60s and mostly handles the morning tea service and the hot water dispensing, and who sings quietly to herself in Japanese while she works. This is your team. None of you signed up for this. Not for the kitchen, and certainly not for Manzanar. You were a secretary. You worked for a shipping company in Los Angeles and could type 70 words per minute and had plans. Vague, incomplete, but real plans. That involved continuing your night school courses and maybe becoming something more than a secretary. Then February 19th happened, and the plans became a different kind of problem. You ended up in the kitchen because Mrs. Tanaka needed someone who could read English, specifically the military requisition forms that come in for food supplies, which are written in a bureaucratic English that manages to be simultaneously precise and confusing. You can read them. You can translate them for Mrs. Tanaka. You can argue, in writing and in person, with the WRA administrative office, when the forms say you're being allocated 8 pounds of beef for 300 people, which works out to just over 4 ounces per person, which is not a meal. You've gotten good at that particular argument. Breakfast at Manzanar is served from 6:30 to 8. That's the official window. In reality, the first people show up at 6:15, standing outside in the cold, because the barrack is cold too, and at least in the mess hall there's heat. Children, mostly. Teenagers. Elderly people who sleep badly on the army cots and give up trying around 5. The doors open and the hall fills in a specific way. First, the early people, who drift in with the particular behaviour of those who have learned not to rush anymore. Then the main wave, starting around 6:45. Families mostly, though the definition of family has gotten complicated here. People whose spouses are in different blocks because the administrative assignment system grouped people by the order they arrived, which was sometimes alphabetical and sometimes geographical and sometimes apparently random. Couples eating in different buildings, children eating with grandparents in one mess hall, parents in another. The government's position is that this isn't a problem. There's food in every mess hall. The community's position is that eating together is the point, that family meals are not logistically equivalent to eating the same food in different buildings, that this matters. The government finds this attitude puzzling. You are 22 years old, you were born in Los Angeles, you went to American schools, you have read the Constitution, and you are standing behind a steam table inside a barbed wire fence in the California desert serving breakfast to people who have committed no crime. And you find the government's puzzlement about mealtimes extremely difficult to sympathise with. But the line is forming, and the rice is ready, and you have work to do. Breakfast this morning, steamed rice. A protein, today it's scrambled eggs, powdered, which is its own story. Pickled vegetables, which Mrs. Tanaka made herself from whatever she could get, because the WRA doesn't issue tsukemono, and Mrs. Tanaka has decided this is a battle she's willing to fight within the constraints of what's available. Miso soup, sort of, made from the white miso paste that comes in the ration supplies, and which is nothing like the red miso the Issei families used at home, but which is what's here. Toast, from white bread loaves baked in block 12, which has the better ovens, and tea. Always tea. This is the one absolute. If everything else fails, and on certain days in the spring of 1942, other things did fail, the tea must be there. You stand behind the serving counter and ladle rice. Scoop, drop, scoop, drop. The line moves in front of you. Faces you've started to recognize after 2 months. Mr. Hirano from 14C, who always nods and says arigato, and means it with a formality that feels like it belongs in a different setting, a different world. The Watanabe children, 4 of them, the youngest maybe 5, who holds out her tray with both hands the way she's been taught. Mrs. Fuji, who once owned a nursery in Gardena and has a quality of stillness about her, like a person who's learned to wait. An elderly man whose name you don't know yet, who comes every morning last, just before 8, always alone, who never makes eye contact but once, early on, looked at the rice you gave him and said quietly, "It's better than yesterday." You adjusted the water ratio that day. It has been the same since. The powdered eggs are a problem of chemistry, physics and morale, roughly in that order. The WRA dietary specifications call for protein. Real eggs, shell eggs, as the ration documents call them, shell eggs being a specific category distinct from the powdered kind, which tells you something about who wrote these specifications and where they assumed the difference would matter. Real eggs are issued at a ratio that sounds reasonable until you do the math. 1 shell egg per person per day is the target. The reality is closer to 3 eggs per person per week, if you're lucky, and in the early months it's less than that. The rest of the protein budget goes to powdered eggs. Powdered eggs are made by spray-drying liquid whole egg into a fine yellow-grey powder. They were developed for military use, for exactly this kind of large-scale feeding situation where refrigeration is limited and logistics are complicated. In theory, you reconstitute them with water and cook them, and they are eggs. In practice, they're a thing that tastes like eggs had a bad idea about themselves and followed through on it. The texture is wrong, too uniform. Real scrambled eggs have variation, some parts more set, some parts slightly runny. The specific curds that form when you cook eggs over the right heat in the right fat. Powdered eggs, reconstituted, produce a consistency closer to a very firm pudding. The colour is wrong too, a flat yellow without the slight variance you get from real yolks. The smell is the worst part. Not rotten, not truly bad. But a specific sulphurous note underneath the egg smell, something cooked protein and slightly chemical, that announces itself before you even lift the serving spoon. Mrs. Tanaka has found things to do with them. She adds the miso paste in small amounts to the reconstituted mixture before cooking. Just a half teaspoon per dozen eggs worth. Invisible in the flavour, but doing something to the umami of the finished product. She adds finely diced green onions when she has them. She fries the eggs in rounds on the cast iron, which produces better edges and better texture than scrambling directly in the pan. It's not good, but it is better than it was. Henry said, the first week, that this was like being asked to make silk from burlap, and that the correct response was to acknowledge you have burlap and stop pretending otherwise. Mrs. Tanaka said, without looking up from the pan, that people who are hungry do not complain about burlap. Henry didn't say anything after that. By 8 o'clock, the breakfast service is done. You have fed approximately 273 people. You know the number because you keep count out of professional habit, and also because the count matters for the afternoon requisition forms. The dining hall empties. The long tables, rows of them, plain boards on sawhorses, benches on either side, hold the evidence of 300 people's mourning. Dropped napkins, a forgotten cup, a child's drawing someone left behind, small penciled flowers on the back of a WRA bulletin. You collect the serving equipment and carry it to the washing area. The washing area is a long concrete trough with running water and wire brushes and a commercial dishwasher that works about 70% of the time. The other 30% it either runs too cool, which means the dishes aren't properly sanitized and you have to do them again by hand, or it dumps a sudden gush of scalding water that has caught you across the wrist twice and left marks that took 3 weeks to fade. The water here is always either not hot enough or too hot. There is no middle. Your hands are going into it regardless. In the window between breakfast cleanup and lunch prep, if there is a window, you work on the inventory. The inventory is a document that lives in a metal clipboard hung on a nail near the walk-in cooler door. It lists everything on hand, in units that the WRA has decided are appropriate. Pounds, gallons, dozens, cases. Mrs. Tanaka cannot read the English well enough to update it herself. You update it. This morning's inventory tells you that you have 14 pounds of ground beef, which is the weekly allotment, and it has to last through Sunday, which is 5 days, which at 300 people per day means you need to stretch 1 pound of beef across approximately 100 people per day, which in anyone's mathematics is not a pound of beef serving 100 people. It's the suggestion of beef serving 100 people. 40 pounds of carrots, slightly soft because the walk-in cooler runs 3 degrees warmer than it should. 60 pounds of potatoes, ditto. 2 cases of canned tomatoes. 1 case of canned spinach. 12 cans of creamed corn, which nobody wants but which count toward the vegetable allotment. Dried soybeans. 50 pounds. This is new. The WRA has recently decided that soybeans are a nutritionally and economically efficient protein source, which is true, and has increased the soybean allocation, which is fine, except that soybeans need to soak for at least 8 hours before cooking and require specific preparation techniques. And the initial distribution came with no information about how to use them. Mrs. Tanaka knows how to use them. She's been using soybeans her entire life. The WRA did not ask Mrs. Tanaka. The WRA issued a pamphlet. The pamphlet is wrong about the soaking time and wrong about the salt and wrong about 4 other things Mrs. Tanaka identified in the first 2 minutes of reading it. They wrote this in Washington, she said. She said it like that explained everything, because it did. Lunch prep begins at 9. This is the meal that takes the most planning, because lunch is the most attended. Breakfast has its early risers and its late sleepers. Dinner has those who linger, and those who've already eaten somewhere else or aren't hungry after a long afternoon in the desert sun. But lunch pulls almost everyone in. The work shifts in the camp, and there is work. The WRA calls it work opportunities. Compensation ranging from $12 to $19 a month, regardless of skill level. So a doctor and a farmhand earn the same wage, which is one of the smaller indignities of a long list. The work shifts are organised so that most people have a lunch break between 11:30 and 1. 290, maybe 300 people in 90 minutes, with 2 ranges and a steam kettle and 6 staff, and a walk-in cooler that's 3 degrees too warm. Today, lunch is beef stew, or more precisely, vegetable stew with beef present in it. Mrs. Tanaka's version uses the beef as a flavouring agent rather than a main protein. The 14 pounds get cut into very small dice, browned well in the hot fat first to develop the fond, then added to the vegetables. The flavour is there. The protein is distributed. You won't find many large pieces of meat, but you'll know there was meat. The carrots and potatoes get cut into uniform pieces. This is important. Uniform pieces cook at the same rate, which means nothing is mush and nothing is undercooked. You learned this the hard way in week 2 when you cut the potatoes in a hurry, and they came out with that particular half-raw, half-dissolved quality that is worse than either extreme. Tommy Kato is peeling potatoes at the prep table with the steady mechanical rhythm of someone who has made peace with a task he doesn't enjoy. His hands work automatically. Peel, turn, peel. The skins curl away in long ribbons and fall into the scrap bucket. How many more? He asks without looking up. 20 pounds. He doesn't respond, just continues. Peel, turn, peel. His hands have a specific pattern of small cuts and roughness, the kind you get from extended knife and peeler work in cold water. The knuckles are particularly chapped. He doesn't mention this. Nobody mentions it. Pain in your hands is just the texture of this job. At 10 o'clock, a problem. The camp delivery, the twice-weekly truck that brings supplies from the WRA. Warehouse in Independence, 12 miles north, came this morning. You know this because you heard it, the heavy diesel sound cutting through the thin desert air around 7:30, during the tail end of breakfast service. The manifest says, beef, ground, 14 pounds, carrots, 40 pounds, potatoes, 60 pounds, flour, 25 pounds, miscellaneous canned goods, assorted. What actually arrived? Beef, none. The truck driver, a young white man from Independence who looks like he finds this whole situation slightly confusing, hands you the manifest with beef, unavailable, shortage, written in pencil across the beef line. He shrugs. He's not in charge of the warehouse. You look at the manifest for a moment. 300 people expecting stew for lunch. The stew is planned around beef. The beef is not here. We have soybeans, you say. Not to the driver, but to yourself, thinking out loud. He looks at you. Thank you, you say to him. You can go. You take the manifest inside and hand it to Mrs. Tanaka. She reads the penciled note. Her face doesn't change. She has had this face, this careful, undisturbed face, since the day you met her, and you've started to understand it's not that she doesn't feel things. She feels everything. She's just decided not to let what she feels stop what she does. She puts the manifest on the clipboard. Soak the soybeans now. 2 hours. We'll use the small pot for the bean broth. The stew will be different. The stew will be what it is. She turns back to the range. This is the daily problem of the Manzanar kitchen. Not a dramatic problem. Not a crisis, exactly. Just the steady, grinding, specific reality of being asked to feed human beings with the resources of an afterthought. The WRA's daily food allowance per person is 45 cents. 45 cents for 3 meals in 1942. You can go check what 45 cents bought in 1942. You should. It will clarify your feelings about the situation. The answer is not much. The answer is certainly not enough to provide what the WRA's own nutritional guidelines specify as adequate protein and caloric intake for working adults. The math doesn't work. Someone in Washington knows the math doesn't work. Someone in Washington has decided this is acceptable. You do what Mrs. Tanaka does. You turn back to the work. Here's what you learn to do with soybeans. First, the soaking. You pour 2 gallons of dried soybeans into the large stock pot and cover them with cold water. Enough to cover by 3 inches, because they will absorb and you will need that buffer. The beans are hard and smooth, a pale yellow-tan colour, each one perfectly symmetrical. They clatter against the pot as you pour them, a dry, rattling sound. They sit in the cold water and slowly over the next 2 hours change. They swell. The skins wrinkle and then smooth out again as the interior hydrates. If you lift one and press it between your fingers after 2 hours, there's give to it. Not soft, but no longer the stone hardness of the dry bean. Second, the broth. You can't make beef stew without beef, but you can make something that operates in the same register. Mrs. Tanaka takes the dried shiitake mushroom she's been rationing, a small personal supply she brought from home, kept in a tin in the back of the storage shelf where the WRA inspectors are unlikely to find them, because the WRA inspectors are looking for contraband that presents more obvious security threats than dried mushrooms. And also the WRA inspectors don't always know what shiitake mushrooms look like. 4 mushrooms. She soaks them in a cup of hot water while the beans are soaking. The liquid that comes off the mushrooms is dark brown, almost black, with a particular deep, savoury smell. Umami is not a word widely used in English in 1942, but the concept exists. The concept is in that small cup of mushroom-soaking liquid. She combines the mushroom liquid with water, with a splash of the soy sauce that's issued in small quantities, there's never enough, with a small amount of what she calls her secret. And here you've watched her often enough to know the secret is a tablespoon of rice wine vinegar added to the broth before anything else goes in, for reasons of acidity and brightness that she's never fully explained in words, but that you've tasted the difference of when she didn't add it. You cook the soaked soybeans in this broth. The beans absorb the colour and flavour of the liquid as they cook. After an hour, they're soft, not mushy. They're still resistance when you bite down. A specific firmness that soybeans maintain even when fully cooked, but soft. They've taken on the dark colour of the broth. They smell of mushroom and soy. You add the carrots and potatoes. The vegetable broth reduces around everything. You add the canned tomatoes. The whole thing becomes something dense and dark and flavoured in a way that's entirely Japanese inflected, which is not what people were expecting when they got in line for beef stew, and which some of the residents, specifically some of the Nisei, these second-generation people who grew up eating hamburgers and hot dogs and wanting nothing more than to be normal American kids, will complain about later. But the Issei will eat it in silence, and some of them will not stop eating it in silence, and eventually someone will come back for seconds, and then someone else. And by the time the lunch service ends, the pot will be scraped clean. The lunch line starts at 11:30. You're back behind the counter, this time with the large serving ladle, the one with the bent handle that actually makes it easier to scoop from the deep pot. Ladle, pour, move. The line is different at lunch. More people, more energy. The morning's work, whatever work means here. Some people have jobs in the camp offices or the camouflage net factory or the farm fields. Some are attending the hastily organised school for the children. Some are doing nothing because there is nothing for them to do. And the doing of nothing in a prison camp is its own particular experience. The morning's work has passed and people are ready to sit. There's noise in the mess hall, more than at breakfast. The children are loud. Groups of men, mostly the Nisei, the American-born men who are in that particular no-man's land of being too American to accept this quietly and too Japanese to be trusted, according to the logic of the people who built this place. Groups of men cluster at the end tables and talk in a way that's too loud and too fast and that you've learned means something is building. There is always something building at Manzanar. But for now, the lane, the faces, the steady rhythm of ladle and pour, the stew goes over rice. Mrs. Tanaka is serving the rice today. She does this on the days when she wants to control the portion directly, when she knows the supply is tight and needs to stretch. She gives slightly larger portions to the elderly, slightly larger to the children. Nobody mentions this, it just happens. An old man stops in front of your station. You've seen him before. Every lunch he comes early, takes a seat near the window on the east side of the hall, the one that has a view of the mountains, the Sierra Nevada, white with snow for most of the year, even now in late spring because at that altitude it doesn't fully melt until July. He's maybe 70. His name is Watanabe Hideo, and you know from the camp newsletter. There is a camp newsletter, the Manzanar Free Press, published by the residents, which has a particular quality of determined normality in its coverage. You know he used to farm in Fresno. Strawberries. 40 acres of strawberries and a small amount of asparagus. He left it all. Or rather, he had 10 days and couldn't find a buyer for the land and had to walk away from it. 40 acres and the equipment and the irrigation and the 20 years of learning exactly what this particular piece of Fresno soil would do and wouldn't do. He looks at the stew today, at the dark broth and the soybeans. Natsukashi, he says, mostly to himself. You know enough Japanese to understand the word. It doesn't translate cleanly. It means something like, this evokes a longing for the past, a specific, gentle ache for something you've lost. It's not quite sadness, and it's not quite happiness, and it's the particular human experience of a smell or a taste reaching back through time, and touching something you thought was gone. He takes his tray and finds his seat by the window. You watch him sit down, face the mountains, eat. By 1:30 the lunch service is done. You have 4 hours before dinner prep. This is not, as it might sound, 4 hours of rest. It is 4 hours of cleaning the kitchen, inventorying what was used, starting whatever needs long cooking for dinner, submitting the afternoon requisition form to the WRA office, and handling whatever specific problem today has decided to introduce. Today, the specific problem is a complaint about the food. This is not unusual. There are food complaints every day at Manzanar, which is itself a microcosm of the larger tensions in the camp. The complaints come from multiple directions and are often in direct conflict with each other. From one direction, the food is too Japanese. The Nisei, especially the younger ones, grew up eating American food. They want meatloaf, they want hot dogs. They want something that doesn't identify them as Japanese in a moment when being identified as Japanese is literally what got them imprisoned. Some of them have been pushing for years to be seen as American. The camp's food keeps reminding everyone that the people who run it see them as Japanese. From another direction, the food is not Japanese enough. The Issei, the people who came from Japan and built lives here, and are now behind barbed wire and have nothing except what they carried, want the food that connects them to who they are. They want proper dashi, not this military issue approximation. They want the rice to be right. They want tsukemono. They want the things that mean home. Mrs. Tanaka stands between these two complaints every single day and makes decisions that satisfy neither group fully and offend neither group fatally. And this is an act of diplomacy that nobody in the WRA administration acknowledges or understands or probably even knows is happening. Today's complaint comes from a man named George Ito, who is 28 and grew up in San Pedro, and has strong opinions that he delivers in English with a specific combative energy you've seen in a lot of the young men. The rice is fine, he says, but can we have something that isn't this? He gestures at the serving area. This traditional Japanese stuff. I'm American. I want American food. You look at him. We have 45 cents per person per day, you say. That's not my... Meatloaf requires beef, binders, and a working oven at the right temperature. We have an oven that runs hot on the left side and cold on the right side, ground beef at £1/4 pound per person per week when we get it, and powdered eggs as a binder. We can make meatloaf. It will taste different from what you're imagining. A pause. But we can try, you add. If you want to request it through the mess hall committee, we can try. He looks at you. Something in his posture shifts, not quite conceding, but recalibrating. There's a mess hall committee? There can be, you say, if people organise one. He doesn't say anything else, walks away. 2 weeks later, there is a mess hall committee. At 3 o'clock, you have 30 minutes that are actually yours. You take them outside. The Owens Valley at 3 in the afternoon in May has a specific quality of light that you found yourself thinking about at odd moments when you can't sleep. It comes from the west, from over the Sierra Nevada, which run north-south along the valley's western edge, and it falls at a particular angle this time of year that illuminates the mountains from the side, catches every ridge and crevice, turns the snowfields above 10,000 feet into something that almost hurts to look at directly. The light is doing that now. You walk past the last row of barracks, past the edge of the residential area, to the fence line, not the main fence. You're not going to the main fence, which has guard tower and searchlights and a particular psychological weight that you avoid when you can. There's a secondary perimeter, just a single strand wire, that marks the boundary of the residential zone. You stop there. To the west, mountains. The Sierra Nevada rise from this valley with an abruptness that geologists would call dramatic if they were being restrained. They don't slope up gradually, they go up. Mount Whitney, 50 miles to the south and visible as a particular notch in the skyline, is the highest point in the continental United States. 14,505 feet. The peaks nearest to Manzanar are lower but still formidable. 12,000 feet, permanent snow, clouds forming against the rock faces in the afternoons. When you first arrived, you thought the mountains were wrong somehow. Too big, too present, like someone had placed a backdrop too close to the stage. Now you find them necessary. They are the one thing here that has nothing to do with the war, the order, the wire, the 45 cents per person per day, the powdered eggs, the WRA pamphlets with incorrect information about soybeans. The mountains predate all of that by something in the order of 400 million years, and they will remain after everything built in this valley, the barracks and the guard towers and the administrative buildings, have fallen back into dust. You stand there for a little while. The wind comes down off the peaks and pushes at your hair and your clothes. It smells of sage and cold and something high and clear that has no name, but that your lungs recognize as the opposite of the coal smoke and kitchen fat you've been breathing since 4:30. You breathe it in. Below you, or rather spread around you, because the valley floor is flat and you're not elevated, you are on the same plane as everything else. The camp continues its afternoon. Children running between barracks. A group of old men playing Go in the strip of shade along one building's northern wall. Laundry on improvised lines, snapping in the same wind that's reaching you now. 15,000 people behind the wire at Manzanar's peak. 15,000. Bigger than many California towns, bigger than Owens Valley had ever been. A city assembled in weeks from raw lumber and tar paper and army surplus, dropped in the middle of a dry lake bed and left to become something, or not, or whatever it could manage in the space between the mountains and the government's specific form of organized forgetting. And it does become something. This is the thing you couldn't have predicted from outside it. It becomes a community. Imperfect and contested and argued over constantly, but a community. There is the newspaper and the school and the hospital and the churches and the Buddhist temple and the mess halls with their resident conflicts about rice ratios, and there are informal systems of every kind. The Issei women who grow small kitchen gardens outside their barracks, defying the alkaline soil with sheer determination and whatever seeds they could get. The men who build furniture from scrap lumber to make the barracks livable. The artists who find materials somehow and produce work that has no obvious audience except each other and the mountains. People don't stop being people because they've been put behind wire. This is both obvious and, in the specific context of 1942 California, apparently not obvious to everyone. You're back in the kitchen by 3:30. Dinner tonight. Rice, which is always there. The constant of the Manzanar table. A protein, which tonight is going to be more of the soybeans supplemented by whatever the 3 cans of tuna you found at the back of the supply shelf amount to, divided among 300 people, which amounts to a very slight gesture of tuna, braised cabbage, because there are 2 heads of it, miso soup, again, which is also always there, and something special. Mrs. Tanaka is making onigiri, not for dinner service, not exactly. She's making them for something else. There are children in this camp, 4,200 of them at Manzanar's population peak, who are being educated in makeshift schools in buildings that started as warehouses, sitting on benches made from lumber scraps, taught by other residents who were teachers before the order came and who are being paid the same $12 a month as everyone else for doing the work they spent years training for. Some of these children have not been eating properly. The mess hall system doesn't naturally accommodate children's nutritional schedules. 3 set meal times, no snacks, and children who are at school during part of the lunch window often miss the meal or arrive at its tail end when the best of what's available is gone. Mrs. Tanaka has decided to do something about this. She's making 300 onigiri from the breakfast's leftover rice. Small triangular rice balls filled with a tiny amount of pickled plum or salted salmon from her rations, wrapped in whatever nori she can get, which is very little nori, barely a strip per ball, but the nori is there, the seaweed smell of it cutting through the kitchen's usual atmosphere. She shapes them with her hands. The movements are automatic, practiced over decades. Both hands cupped, the rice pressed between the palms with a specific pressure, the corners pinched into the triangle shape. That is what an onigiri is supposed to look like, and not the sad amorphous lump that results when you try to shape them without training. You watch her do it. Can I help? She looks at the way your hands are positioned, trying to mirror hers. Watch first. You watch. The way her thumbs work against the heel of her palms, the way she applies pressure in 3 quick pulses rather than one sustained squeeze, the way she knows when the ball is done without checking it. Now try. Your first attempt comes out lopsided, one corner extending too far, the rice not tight enough in the middle. It will hold for approximately 10 minutes before it starts to fall apart. More pressure in the middle, she says, less at the edges. Your second attempt is better. Not good, but better. The children won't care if they're not perfect, you say. She shapes another one without looking at you. You care, she says. I care. That's enough. This is what Mrs. Tanaka means. Not the specific philosophical point about craftsmanship, though that's in there. What she means is that caring, specifically continuing to care about the quality of what you do even when no one is requiring you to, even when the people you're feeding have no alternative and will eat what they are given regardless, even when the government that put you here neither knows nor cares whether you do your work with skill or without it. Caring is a form of resistance. It is the specific form of resistance available to a 61-year-old Japanese woman in a prison camp in 1942, which does not have the drama of other forms of resistance, does not produce the kind of story that ends up in history books or documentary films, and which is arguably more difficult to sustain over years than the dramatic kinds. Making the rice right, getting the water ratio exact, making the onigiri so they hold together until the children eat them, preserving, in miniature, in the specific acts of a working kitchen, the argument that the people here are worth caring for, that the food they eat should be made with skill and attention, that 45 cents per person per day is a number that exists in a ledger somewhere, and that a bowl of properly made miso soup is something that exists in the world, that these two things are not equally important. The delivery of the onigiri happens at 4:15, when the afternoon school session ends. You carry them in a flat pan covered with a clean cloth, with Henry Oshima carrying a second pan beside you, walking the 2 blocks to the school buildings. The children come out in the particular burst of energy that the end of a school day produces, and you stand there with the pans and distribute them. Some of the children take the onigiri without looking up, already talking to their friends the way children do. Some of them look at what they're getting, recognize it, and their faces change. Something settles in them, not happiness exactly, recognition. These are children who grew up eating onigiri and who, for the past weeks, have been eating powdered eggs and canned spinach. A small girl, maybe 7, bites into hers and then holds it with both hands and looks at it. "It has she says, "pickled plum." "Yes," you say. She doesn't say anything else. She eats it carefully with both hands still, and there is nothing childlike about the attention she gives it. It is the attention of someone retrieving something they thought they'd lost. Henry watches this and doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. Back in the kitchen, dinner prep finishes at 5:30. Service runs 6 to 7:30. The evening service is the one where people linger. After dinner there isn't much. There are a few organised activities in the evenings. Amateur theatre, music, the Buddhist services that happen in a barrack that's been adapted as a temple, the various clubs and associations and artistic groups that the residents have organised because people need things to organise. But for many people, especially the Issei, whose English is limited and who are in a strange nowhere of not being allowed to become citizens and yet not being welcome in Japan either, and who understand more clearly than the Nisei perhaps that nothing will be the same after this regardless of how the war ends. For them there isn't much. So dinner service has a different energy from lunch. People eat more slowly. Tables have small conversations that go on longer. The sense of being somewhere to be is less present. You watch this from behind the counter as the line slows. An old woman, Mrs. Kimura from Block 9, who comes as this mess hall instead of her own because Block 9's is, according to her, run by someone who doesn't understand dashi. Mrs. Kimura sits with a group of other Issei women, and they talk in Japanese too fast for you to follow, and occasionally they laugh. And the laughter in the mess hall is one of the things that surprises you still, even after 2 months. Not surprised that people laugh, but at the way it sounds here. The specific quality of it. How it insists on itself, as if the people doing it are aware of the irony of laughing in this place, and have decided the irony does not outweigh the need. The dishwashing at the end of dinner service takes until 9. 270 pots. Pans, trays, cups, plates, serving ladles. You've gotten faster. In the first weeks it took until 10, 10:30. Now 9, sometimes 8:45 if the dishwasher cooperates. Your hands, by this point in the day, have a specific feeling you've stopped trying to describe precisely. They are neither fully numb nor fully sensitive. The skin on the knuckles has that tight, slightly cracked quality of skin that has been wet and then dry and then wet again too many times. The joints of your fingers, especially the right hand, have a dull ache that starts around hour 10 and doesn't fully go away until you sleep, and sometimes not then. You've started keeping a small tin of petroleum jelly in your apron pocket. Apply it at the end of the night, before the walk back to the barrack. It helps some. The concrete floor is something else. 8 hours on concrete is, there's a specific kind of fatigue that starts in the soles of your feet and moves up through your calves and settles in your lower back, and it has a different quality from muscular fatigue. It's skeletal. It's the specific protest of bones against an unforgiving surface. You've found that wrapping your feet in extra cloth before putting your shoes on helps slightly. Someone in the camp, an old Sansei woman who had worked restaurants for 30 years, told you this. She told you with the slightly amused delivery of someone sharing wisdom that should be obvious, and would be obvious to anyone who'd been doing this long enough. You will remember it. The walk home at 9:15. The searchlights are doing their 45-second arcs. The desert air has cooled to something around 40 degrees, which after the kitchen feels clean and sharp and almost welcome. The barracks are mostly dark. A few windows lit with the faint yellow of kerosene lamps or single electric bulbs. Some of the residents are awake. You can hear low conversations, a radio somewhere playing something you can't identify. Your father is awake when you come in. He's sitting by the small window with a book. He's a reader, always has been. And the camp library, such as it is, has become one of the places he goes that seems to return something to him of who he was outside. He looks up. How's the kitchen? Fine, you say. This is your standard exchange. He doesn't push and you don't explain, and you're both aware that fine doesn't cover it, but that the alternative is a conversation neither of you has the energy for at 9:15. Your mother saved you dinner, he says, nodding toward the small covered plate on the footlocker. You sit on the edge of your cot and eat the rice and cold pickled vegetables your mother saved, and it tastes better than anything you served tonight, which doesn't make sense logistically because it is the same rice and the same pickles, but makes complete sense in every other way. Summer comes to the Owens Valley like an argument nobody wins. The temperature in July reaches 112 degrees. This is not heat you can prepare for. It is heat that exists in the air as a physical force, dry and total, that presses against you when you step outside and is still there when you go back in. The kitchen in July is its own specific environment. The ranges put out heat. The steam kettle puts out heat. The ovens put out heat. The bodies of 6 people working in close quarters put out heat. The tar paper walls of the building absorb heat from outside and radiate it inward. By 8 in the morning, the kitchen temperature is above 90. By noon, it's above 100. You're cooking over fire in a room that is above 100 degrees. The cast iron radiates off it. The steam from the large pots lifts and doesn't dissipate because there's nowhere for it to go and the ventilation is insufficient. The air in the kitchen becomes a thing you push through rather than breathe. You drink water constantly. There is always a pitcher of water on the prep table, refilled hourly. Mrs. Tanaka enforces this. She has seen, somewhere in her 61 years of knowing things, what heat exhaustion looks like, and she does not want to see it in her kitchen. Drink, she says, without looking at you, the same way she says, the rice hasn't started yet. You drink. The diet shifts in summer. This is partly the WRA reducing allocation of certain items in summer, the reason given, spoilage risk in the heat, and partly Mrs. Tanaka's own adjustments, and partly the availability of things grown in camp. There are gardens. The camp gardens are one of the things that the history books mention and then move past, but they deserve more than that. Starting in spring 1942, the residents of Manzanar begin growing food. Not because the WRA encourages this, they're cautiously neutral on it, concerned about residents having knives and tools, and the general principle that productive enterprise in a prison camp is complicated, but because the Issei farmers and gardeners, people who have been growing things in California soil for decades, are not going to spend the rest of the war doing nothing. They clear land. Hard, alkaline desert land that hasn't been cultivated in years or possibly ever, that requires amendment with whatever organic material they can source. They build irrigation from the camp's water system, extending pipes with improvised connections that shouldn't work but do. They plant tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, squash. Green onions, the indispensable green onion. Shiso, the fragrant Japanese herb whose smell, when you cut it, is one of those smells that does what the old man's word said, natsukashi, reaches back and touches something. By July, there is produce. Not enough. Never enough for 15,000 people, but enough that Mrs. Tanaka has fresh green onions for the miso soup several days a week. Enough that Tommy Kato, who peels things, occasionally gets to peel something that was growing in the dirt 24 hours ago. It smells like a real tomato, Tommy said the first day he was handed one. He said it like he was noting something remarkable. Like the fact that a tomato smelled like a tomato was not the ordinary thing it had been 6 months ago. He was right to note it. Nothing here is ordinary. Everything here is specific and chosen and fought for in small ways continuously. In August there's a riot. You don't call it that at first, or rather, you don't call it anything because you're in the kitchen when it starts and you don't know about it immediately. What you know is this: at around 6:30 in the evening, during dinner service, the sound from outside changes. There's a particular kind of noise that a crowd makes when it shifts from gathered to moving with purpose. A change in the register of collective sound that you can hear even through the mess hall walls, even over the noise of the serving line and the conversations and the clatter of trays. Mrs. Tanaka notices it before you do. She stops at the range, tilts her head slightly, listening. Then Henry, who was near the door getting more serving spoons from the supply box, comes back quickly. Something's happening outside. The dinner service stops. People in the line start looking toward the windows. Someone outside shouts something in Japanese and then in English. The crowd noise builds. You later learn what happened. A man who worked as an LAPD informant before the internment, who has been identified by other residents as someone who gave information to the authorities that led to additional arrests, has been attacked. He survives. There are arrests, there are injuries, there are decisions made by the camp administration in the following days that have the feel of punishments directed at the community broadly rather than the individual specifically involved. You are not directly in any of it, but you are in the middle of it in the way that everyone in Manzanar is in the middle of it, which is, you're trapped in a place where tension has been building since February and has nowhere to go, and the tension finds its way out in available directions. What you know from your specific position is that dinner service that night ends with approximately a third of the normal attendance. People don't come in. They're outside, in the dark, in the crowd, in whatever is happening. The food sits in the steam table pans, gets cold, gets put away. You clean up in near silence. Henry's anger, which is usually below the surface, is fully visible now, in the way he moves, in the set of his jaw. Mrs. Tanaka says nothing for a long time. Then, write down what we served tonight and how much was left. For the record, so they know we try to feed people. You write it down. In the days after, something shifts in the mess hall. It is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. But the essay men who usually eat quickly and leave now sometimes linger, sitting together at the back tables, talking in low voices. The young Nisei men who've been loudest about their American identity are quieter, more watchful. The atmosphere in the dining room has the quality of a room where something has cracked, and the crack is being examined. The mess committee that George Ito organised begins meeting weekly. Mrs. Tanaka attends the first meeting. She sits in the back and doesn't speak. You ask her afterward what she thought. They want things I can't give them, she says. Like what? like an explanation for why things are the way they are. And you can't give them that. I can give them food, she says. That's what I can give. You think about this for a long time after. The limitation of it and the sufficiency of it simultaneously. October arrives and the desert cools. The change is rapid when it comes. 1 week the temperatures are still above 90, and then there's a change in the wind from the north, down from the mountain passes, and within 48 hours it's below 60 in the afternoons and dropping into the 30s at night. The kitchen becomes a refuge again rather than an ordeal. The cold has its own demands. The ranges need to be kept burning longer, started earlier, maintained more carefully. The walk-in cooler, which in summer you simply try to keep cold enough to prevent spoilage, now needs to be kept warm enough to prevent the pipes from freezing, which means there are mornings when you come in and the first task is checking that the cooler's temperature is still above freezing, and if it isn't, you have a problem that needs immediate attention. November brings the question, the loyalty questionnaire, Form DSS-304A, administered by the Selective Service to all internees over 17. 2 questions that have become, in the specific world of Manzanar, the most divisive things anyone has said out loud. Question 27. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty, wherever ordered? Question 28. Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese Emperor or any other foreign government, power or organization? These are called the loyalty questions. You're aware of the specific cruelty of question 28, directed at the Issei. The Issei cannot become American citizens. American law prohibits it. If they renounce loyalty to Japan, they become people with no country at all, stateless. And they are being asked to do this as a condition of continued, what? Liberty? They are in a prison camp. What exactly does loyalty get them? But the questions are real and they require answers. You answer yes and yes. Your father answers yes and yes. Your mother answers yes and yes, staring at the form for a long time before doing so. There are people in the camp who answer no and no, the no-no boys as they come to be called, out of protest, out of principled refusal to pledge loyalty to a country that has imprisoned them without charge, out of fear about what saying yes actually commits them to. Some of them end up transferred to Tule Lake, a segregation centre. Some of the young men who answer yes to both questions go on to serve in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the all-Nisei unit that becomes one of the most decorated units in American military history. They fight in Italy and France and Germany, while their families remain behind barbed wire. These are the specific circumstances of the loyalty questionnaire. In the kitchen, in the days while people are filling out the forms, you observe. People eat differently. They eat faster, mostly. The slow, lingering dinners of summer and early fall are replaced by a focused, slightly urgent quality of consumption, like people fueling themselves for something ahead. Mrs. Kimura's table of Issei women is quieter than usual. The Nisei men's table near the window is louder. Mrs. Tanaka makes soup every day that week, richer than usual. The soup she makes when she's paying close attention to what people need without being able to say it directly. Tonkotsu-style pork broth, made from the pork bones that came in the ration delivery and that she'd been saving. She saves things, small, precious things, in the back of the supply shelf. simmered for 6 hours until the broth is cloudy and deep, and the fat has been coaxed into a silky emulsion that coats the inside of the mouth. She doesn't explain why the soup is better that week. You don't ask. Winter in the Owens Valley has a violence to it that summer, for all its extremity, doesn't quite match. The cold is severe and the wind is the delivery mechanism. The Santa Ana winds come down the passes in gusts that can hit 60, 70 miles an hour, and they carry the alkaline dust of the valley floor in quantities that block out the sun, that get through the gaps in the barrack walls and settle on everything inside, that make the hour after a dust storm a specific exercise in finding out how many surfaces in your daily life have crevices you didn't know about. After a major dust storm in December, you spend an hour picking grit out of the rice, not metaphorically, literally sitting at the prep table, going through a pan of uncooked rice grain by grain, removing the pale grey dust that has found its way through the covered containers. Tommy Cato sits across from you, doing the same thing. His face has the particular blankness of someone doing tedious work while thinking about something else entirely. "My family had a restaurant," he says suddenly. You look up. In Long Beach, Japanese food, tempura mostly. "My dad made the batter from scratch every morning, 6 days a week for 20 years. He goes back to the rice, picking out a fleck of dust. He had to give up the lease when we got the notice. Couldn't sell the business in 10 days, nobody wanted it." He pauses. "We had a sign, good sign, red letters. He left it inside when we locked up. I keep thinking about it." You don't say anything immediately. The right thing to say is not immediately available. "What did the sign say?" "His name," Tommy says. "Cato Family Restaurant. That's all." He goes back to the rice. The two of you pick grit out of the rice in silence. The wind outside is doing its thing to the walls, a particular note in its sound, somewhere between a whistle and a moan, that you've stopped being startled by but that still registers. "When this is over," you say, "maybe he'll open another one." Tommy doesn't answer immediately. "Maybe," he says. Then, "This rice is going to take forever." "I know." "He made better rice than us," Tommy says. "Just so you know." "I believe it." Christmas at Manzanar. This requires some setup. Manzanar's population is not uniformly Buddhist or Shinto. There are Christian families, Japanese Americans who converted or were raised Christian. Many of them, some of whose families have been Christian for 2 or 3 generations. There are Buddhist families. There are families with complicated, mixed relationships to religion that don't fit neatly into either category. Christmas in the camp is therefore a complicated proposition. The WRA issues a special holiday allocation, extra sugar, white flour, a small increase in the meat allocation, dried fruit. Mrs. Tanaka receives this information and processes it with the same expression she uses for all official information, a careful neutrality that could mean acceptance or protest or something in between. "What do you want to make?" you ask her. She thinks about it. "Both things," she says. She makes mochi, the pounded rice cake that is the Japanese New Year food, because New Year is coming, and because it is a thing made with skill and time and communal effort. Pounding mochi traditionally involves multiple people working together with wooden mallets and a stone mortar, and the logistics of doing it in a mess hall kitchen are significant, but the logistics get solved. She also makes a simple spice cake from the white flour and sugar and dried fruit and the spices available, cinnamon in limited quantity, and a small amount of ginger, using a recipe she found somewhere or reconstructed from memory. The cake is not elaborate. It has the slightly dense quality of a cake made without fresh eggs, because fresh eggs are not in abundance. But it is warm from the oven, and it smells of cinnamon and sugar. And the smell in the mess hall on Christmas morning is the smell of something that belongs to multiple histories simultaneously. The children, when they come in for breakfast on Christmas, stop and sniff the air. A small boy, maybe 6, looks around like he's trying to locate the source. It smells like Christmas, he says, to no one in particular. Mrs. Tanaka, behind the counter, gives him a slightly larger piece of cake than the serving size. She doesn't say anything. He eats it standing up, still wearing his coat, looking out the window at the mountains. The new year, 1943. Things change and don't change. The WRA introduces new policies around mess hall operation. There are efforts to standardize menus across the camp. There are nutrition surveys. There are meetings that produce reports. There are reports that nobody reads or that produce new meetings. Mrs. Tanaka goes to one of the meetings. She sits in the back. She comes back with a photocopy of a proposed standardized menu that calls for something described as Japanese-style rice dish for Tuesday dinners without specifying what that means. She puts it on the counter. What does Japanese-style rice dish mean, you ask? I don't know, she says. Who wrote this? Washington, she says again. She picks up the paper and folds it neatly and puts it in the drawer where she keeps things that require official response. Then she turns back to the range. We're making oyakodon tonight, she says. Chicken and egg over rice. Oyakodon literally means parent and child bowl. Because the chicken and the egg are both there, and this is a joke that Japanese children have been told about their dinner for generations, and that is simultaneously morbid and comforting in the way that a lot of Japanese food humour is. There's barely enough chicken. The eggs are powdered. The dashi is approximated. It is, within the constraints of Manzanar, good. Spring again. March 1943. 1 year. You're standing in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, and the ritual is exactly the same. The cold floor, the finding of your clothes in the dark, the petroleum jelly tin in your apron pocket, the walk across the open ground with your scarf across your face. But you are not the same person. This is the thing about sustained work in hard conditions. It doesn't make you numb. Or not just numb, it makes you specific. You know things about the kitchen now that you didn't know a year ago, and the knowing is physical. It lives in your hands and in the calibration of your senses. You can tell from the smell of the rice whether it's been 2 minutes too long without being told. You can tell from the sound of the soup whether the heat is wrong. There's a particular bubbling quality that means the temperature has gone above a simmer into something that will damage the delicate flavours. You can look at the walk-in cooler and know from the slight frost pattern on the door whether the temperature has held overnight. None of this was in the training. There was no training. These are things you learned by being in this kitchen for a year, failing at them and adjusting, failing differently and adjusting again, until the adjustments became automatic and the automatic became knowledge. Mrs. Tanaka watches you one morning in March without saying anything. You're starting the miso soup, which you now do without reference to quantity or measurement because the quantities live in your hands. You're faster, she says. I've had practice. That's one word for it. A pause. Your onigiri are better too. You've been making the children's onigiri once a week since August. They're better. She's right. Still not as good as yours. No, she says. Not yet. Yet. That word does something in your chest. In April 1943, something happens that you don't expect. A woman arrives from Block 3. You don't know her name at first. She asks to speak to whoever runs the kitchen. Mrs. Tanaka comes to the counter. The woman introduces herself, Haruo Yamada. She was a professional cook in San Francisco. Kaiseki, the formal Japanese multi-course cuisine, the most technically demanding form of Japanese cooking, the kind where each dish is a composition of flavors and textures and visual elements, and where the presentation is as much a part of the meal as the taste. She has heard from someone in Block 3 that Mess Hall 7 is the best in the camp. She wants to learn how to cook for large numbers. Mrs. Tanaka looks at her for a moment. "You're a kaiseki cook," she says. "Was. In a kaiseki kitchen you cook for 15 people. I know. This kitchen feeds 300. I know that too." A pause. Mrs. Tania turns back toward the range. "Come tomorrow at 4:30, she says. "Don't be late." Haruo Yamada transforms the kitchen. Not immediately, not dramatically. But over the following months, in the way that a person who has spent years thinking deeply about food and how it affects people changes a kitchen just by being present in it. She starts by watching, then by suggesting things, small things, almost tentatively, as if she's not sure of her authority here, which she isn't. Mrs. Tanaka's kitchen is Mrs. Tanaka's kitchen. This is not ambiguous. But her suggestions are good, and Mrs. Tanaka, who is many things but not someone who rejects a good idea on principle, incorporates them. Haru's contribution, presentation. This sounds trivial. In a mess hall serving 300 people, presentation sounds like something from a different world entirely. But the garnish, a single sprig of shiso on the soup when shiso is available, the way the rice in the bowl is given a slight domed shape rather than being dumped flat, the tsukemono when there is tsukemono, arranged at the side of the plate rather than dropped on top. These are small things, but they communicate something. They say we paid attention. They say the person who made this thought about you when they made it. In a place designed to communicate the opposite, that the people inside it do not merit individual attention or care, the slightly domed rice is a political act. The shiso on the soup is a political act. The onigiri that hold together until the children eat them is a political act. None of these acts will end the internment. None of them are visible to the people in Washington who signed the orders, or the people in Sacramento who supported them. None of them will show up in the history books as acts of resistance. But the elderly man who comes every morning and sits by the eastern window facing the mountains and says Natsukashi when he tastes the broth, he feels it. The small girl who holds the onigiri with both hands and says it has ume, she feels it. Your father, who is losing things he has no words for, losing the sense of himself as a man who did something in the world, who came to this country with almost nothing and built something by decades of careful, persistent work, and who is now behind barbed wire with his books and his dignity held together with visible effort. He feels it when your mother saves him rice from the mess hall and he eats it in the barrack room and it tastes like something someone made on purpose. July 1943. The heat is again intense and the kitchen is again above 100 degrees by 9 in the morning. Tommy Kato turns 16. Nobody in the kitchen makes a big production of this. He wouldn't want them to. But Mrs. Tanaka makes a small anmitsu, a Japanese dessert, aga jelly with red beans and fruit syrup served cold, and sets it at his prep station before the morning shift covered with a small cloth. He finds it when he comes in, He stands there looking at it. He's 16 years old, and he's been peeling things in this kitchen since he was 15, and his family's restaurant sign is locked up somewhere in Long Beach, and he has been so matter-of-fact about all of it, about the peeling and the chapped hands and the tedium and the fact of being here, that you sometimes forget he's a child. He picks up the anmitsu and eats it standing at his station, looking at nothing in particular, and his face does something complicated. Then he puts the bowl down, picks up the peeler, and starts on the morning's carrots. Peel, turn, peel. August 1943. Your brother Tadashi turns 18. This is the age at which, under the new policy, Nisei men can volunteer for the army. He volunteers. This decision is not simple. Your father doesn't speak for 2 days after Tadashi tells him. Your mother's reaction is something you don't witness directly because she closes the curtain that she pretends is a wall, and she's on her side of it for a long time, and there are sounds from behind it that you decide very firmly you did not hear. Tadashi's logic when he explains it, they said yes, and yes on the questionnaire. If yes means something, if allegiance means something, if being American means something, then he should be able to do the American thing and serve. And if being American doesn't mean anything, if the yes on the questionnaire is just a performance required of people who have no choice, then there's nothing to lose by continuing the performance to its logical conclusion. It's not a happy logic, but it's coherent. He reports for induction in September. He ends up with the 442nd in Italy. He comes home in 1945, which is not something you know in August 1943. In August 1943, you know nothing about what comes next. The fall of 1943 has a different quality than the fall of 1942. Not better, exactly, but different. The first year was shock and adjustment. The second year is something more settled. Not acceptance, never quite that, but accommodation. The community has built itself into something. The newspaper and the school and the hospital and the kitchen gardens and the mess committees and the arguments and the relationships, all of it has layered into the specific texture of life in a place that was not supposed to produce life. Mrs. Tanaka's kitchen has a reputation. This is not nothing. In a place where you have no power over almost anything, where the government makes the decisions and issues the allocations and holds the gate keys, having a reputation for running the best kitchen in the camp is a form of something. It draws people, not just from Block 7 and 8, but from other blocks. People who walk an extra 5 minutes to eat here because the food is better. It draws Harue Yamada. It draws young women who want to learn, who come in the afternoon and ask questions. Mrs. Tanaka teaches them. She teaches with the same economy of language she uses for everything, not explaining what she's doing, but demonstrating, and then watching the doing and commenting on what's wrong. Less water. The heat is too high. Smell it. What do you smell? What does that mean? And then, again. The kitchen in the fall of 1943 has 6 regular workers, and usually 2 or 3 people learning. The learning changes the kitchen's energy. There's more noise, more asking and answering, more awareness of what each step is and why. You find yourself being the one who explains some things. This is new. You explain the requisition form process. You explain the altitude adjustment for the rice. You explain Mrs. Tanaka's trick with the miso paste in the powdered eggs. Someone asks you why you know this. Because I paid attention, you say. And then, hearing yourself, keep paying attention, you'll know it too. November 1943. A letter from Tadashi. He's in training in Mississippi. The letter has been opened and resealed by military censors, which your mother runs her finger over several times with a specific expression. The letter says he is well, the food is good, better than he expected, which you read as a comment directed at you, who are feeding him metaphorically through the family food history, and that the men in his unit are the best men he's met, which you can feel is true from the way he writes it. He doesn't mention the war directly. The censors would remove it anyway. He mentions a recipe. He says there's a cook in his regiment, an essay man who somehow ended up in the service kitchen, who makes gohan, plain rice, in a way that reminded him of home. He says he asked the man how he did it, and the man told him, "It's just attention," he said. "You just have to pay attention." You read this in the kitchen, between the lunch clean-up and the start of dinner prep, standing at the prep table, the letter in one hand, the inventory clipboard in the other. Mrs. Tanaka is at the range. She's heating water for the afternoon miso tasting, which is a thing she does every day, checking the day's batch before service. You put the letter in your apron pocket. Start on the dinner inventory. The winter of 1943 to 44. A particular thing about Manzanar winter. The frost fairs. Not like the ones on the Thames, nothing that dramatic. But the irrigation channels that run through the camp freeze over some mornings, and there's a specific holiday quality that the children bring to walking on the ice. The careful testing of it with one foot before the other, the small thrill of a surface that's not supposed to hold you briefly holding you. You watch them from the kitchen door on a morning when the temperature has dropped below 20 overnight, the mountains so clear in the cold air that they seem closer than they are, the desert floor white with frost. Tommy Kato is out there with the children from Block 7, technically too old for this game, but participating with a commitment to the activity that he would probably be embarrassed about if you mentioned it. He's showing a small boy how to slide on his boots, holding the child's hand, demonstrating the technique. The child tries it, arms out for balance, and slides maybe 3 feet and falls on his backside. Tommy laughs, actually laughs. Out loud, unguarded, the laugh of a 17-year-old boy who has momentarily stopped carrying the weight of everything else. You go back inside, start the rice. Spring 1944, March, 2 years. You've been in this kitchen for 2 years. The requisition forms you fill out now take 15 minutes where they took 45 in the beginning. You can estimate the day's attendance to within 20 people based on the day of the week, the weather, and certain patterns you've observed. You know that Friday lunch is always better attended than Thursday lunch. You know that heavy dust storms reduce evening attendance because people simply can't get to the mess hall without protection, and not everyone has adequate protection. You know that when the supply truck is late, Mrs. Tanaka always has something in reserve. She has always, in 2 years, had something in reserve. You've asked her about this once, and she said, "You plan for the worst." You've asked her what she considers the worst, and she said, without pausing, that we can't feed them. You think about this sometimes. The feeding as the mission. Not the feeding as a job or a duty or an assigned responsibility. The feeding as the thing that defines success and failure in binary terms. Either people are fed or they are not. Everything else is secondary. Mrs. Tanaka is not a political person. She doesn't talk about the war or the order or the questionnaire or the resistance or the loyalty or any of the things that fill the camp's intellectual and emotional atmosphere. She talks about food, about equipment, about what's available and what needs to be done. But in 2 years of watching her, you've understood something. The not politics is also politics. The choice to put all of herself into the kitchen, to make the miso better, to adjust the rice ratio, to save the onigiri for the children, to teach anyone who comes and asks, is a way of saying this matters. What happens inside these walls to these people, on these plates, in these bowls? It matters not in a way that will be recorded or recognised by anyone outside, but in the way that anything done well matters. It changes the specific texture of a life, and the lives that intersect with it, and those lives intersect with other lives, and you can't trace the full path of a thing done well, but it goes somewhere. Mrs. Tanaka makes the rice right. That's her version of everything. Summer 1944. The camp population is declining. The WRA has begun issuing leave clearances, allowing internees to leave the camp and relocate to areas east of the military exclusion zone. This means, in practical terms, that people can go to Chicago, to Denver, to other parts of the country where the wartime restrictions don't apply. People leave, not en masse, not all at once, but steadily, in small groups. The younger Nisei mostly, those who have job offers or family contacts elsewhere, those who are healthy enough and resourceful enough to manage a relocation in wartime. The mess hall population drops from its peak. Mrs. Tanaka's kitchen adjusts. The quantities change. The rhythms change slightly. There are mornings where the attendance is noticeably lower than the week before, and you look at the leftover food in the steam table pans, still too much because it takes time to recalibrate, and feel something that isn't quite sadness and isn't quite relief. People should go. People should be able to go. The fact that they're going is, in some sense, the beginning of the end of this, which is what everyone has been waiting for. But the kitchen is quieter, and Mrs. Kimura's table of Issei women is smaller, and the old man who faces the mountains and says Natsukashi has gone to relatives in Chicago, and there's a different person at his usual table now who doesn't face the mountains. Your father leaves in August 1944. There's a hardware business in Salt Lake City that needs a manager. Someone who knew him from Los Angeles, who has relocated there already, who vouches for him. Your father is 53 years old and has been managing a hardware supply warehouse for 20 years. He knows inventory and pricing and customer relationships. He's good at his job. He has not done his job in 2.5 years. He is red in this time. He has helped with the camp garden in the early morning hours. He has done what the camp provides for, which is not much. And he has been, quietly and continuously, a person whose sense of himself has been eroded by the specific mechanism of a place that tells you, in every architectural and administrative detail, that you do not merit full human consideration. Salt Lake City is not Los Angeles. The hardware business is not his hardware business, but it is work. It is the thing your father understands as the thing that makes a person real in the world. He leaves on a Tuesday. Your mother stays. Not forever. She will follow in October, when the Salt Lake City apartment is established and there's somewhere for her to arrive. But in August, she stays in the barrack. You come home from the kitchen the night before he leaves, and your father is sitting at the small window with his book closed in his lap, not reading, just looking at the mountains in the last light. You sit beside him. Do you remember, he says, how your grandmother made the suyu for soba? That dipping sauce. You do, barely. You were maybe 6 when your grandmother was still alive, but you remember the smell of it. The mirin and the dashi and the soy sauce in that specific ratio, he says. She never wrote it down. She just knew. He looks at the mountains. There are things you can learn from watching, things that don't get written down. You look at the mountains with him. I know, you say. He puts his hand on your arm for a moment. Then he picks up his book. Go sleep, he says. You have an early morning. Fall 1944. You take over the inventory completely. Mrs. Tanaka has been having trouble with her eyes. A combination of the kitchen smoke and the general stress of the last 2 years has affected her vision in a way that makes reading the small print on the requisition forms difficult. She doesn't mention this directly. You notice that she holds the forms farther from her face, and that sometimes she doesn't look at them at all. One morning you simply start doing the forms before she asks. She watches you for a moment. You know what we need, she says. I've been watching for 2 years. A pause. Yes, she says. You have. She turns back to the range. This is from Mrs. Tanaka, the equivalent of a speech. November 1944. A letter from Tadashi. He's in France now. He cannot say more than that. He says the unit has done things he won't describe. He says he thinks about home sometimes in a way he didn't know you could think about a place. He says the food in the mess tent is fine, which you know means it's not, and that he sometimes thinks about Mrs. Tanaka's miso soup at 6 in the morning, and it seems more vivid than the actual food in front of him. He says, tell her I said so if you think she'd want to know. You tell her. She's at the range. She doesn't turn around. He'll be home, she says. You don't know that. No, she says, but he'll be home. She stirs the soup. December 1944. The exclusion orders are revoked. Effective January 2nd, 1945. Japanese Americans may return to the West Coast. This means the war has moved far enough from California that the military justification for the internment can no longer be maintained with a straight face. Or rather, the military justification never existed with a straight face, but the war has moved far enough that nobody needs to pretend anymore. The camp begins to close, slowly, over the following months. The WRA begins the process of moving people back, or moving them to wherever they're now going, because back is complicated. The house in Boyle Heights that your parents rented no longer has your family's belongings in it. You had 10 days to clear it, and most of what couldn't be carried was sold or given away or simply left. The man who bought your father's hardware stock at his 10-day liquidation price paid about 15 cents on the dollar, which is the price the urgency of an unjust deadline commands. You're going back to Los Angeles. To what exactly is not fully clear. But Los Angeles, January 1945. The mess hall population has dropped below 100. You are cooking for fewer than 100 people 3 times a day in a kitchen designed for 300. The scale has collapsed. Where there used to be 6 workers, there are now 3. You, Mrs. Tanaka, and Tommy Kato, who has nowhere to go yet and who has, over the past 2 years, become something more than the kid who peels things. He cooks now. He's learned from watching and doing the same way you did. His knife work is fast and accurate. He knows the steam kettle's stuck valve by feel. He knows the altitude adjustment for the rice. He's been in this kitchen for 2 years and he is 17 years old. His hands are always slightly rough at the knuckles, permanently chapped. He keeps a tin of petroleum jelly in his apron pocket. You're the one who told him about it. February 1945. Your mother leaves for Salt Lake City. You're in the kitchen. She comes to say goodbye before the truck. She stands in the kitchen doorway in her good coat, the one she wore on arrival and has preserved carefully through 2.5 years of desert dust and coal smoke. She looks at the kitchen, the ranges, the steam kettle, the prep tables, you in your apron with your petroleum jelly tin in your pocket. She looks at you. You've become someone, she says. She doesn't mean this as a critique of who you were before. She means the person you are now has a specific weight to it that the person 2.5 years ago didn't have. You don't know what to say. She holds your face in both hands for a moment. Her hands are very cold. Then she goes. March 1945. The last morning. You have been at Manzanar for 3 years. Longer than most because Mrs. Tanaka stayed, and you stayed because she stayed, and Tommy stayed because you both did, and somebody had to feed the people who were still here. The camp population is below 70. This morning's breakfast, rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables that Haruo Yamada left behind when she went to Denver in November, made from the camp garden's last autumn harvest. 70 people. You cook for them with the same attention as when it was 300. This is not a conscious decision. It's just what you do. Mrs. Tanaka never changed her attention based on numbers, and neither, it turns out, do you. After breakfast, while you're doing the clean-up, Mrs. Tanaka comes to stand beside you. She has her coat. She's going to her son's family in Seattle. You know what to do, she says. I learned from you. No, she says. You learned from yourself. I just showed you some things. You turn to look at her. She's still that same height, the same slightly curved shoulders, the same careful face. She's been in this kitchen since before you arrived. She will leave it today after 3 years of making the rice right. Thank you, you say. It seems insufficient. She nods. The nod communicates more than the words would. She picks up the bag she left by the door. The soybeans, she says, pausing at the doorway. The trick is the mushroom water in the broth. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She leaves. The kitchen. Alone. Tommy is sweeping near the back. The ranges are cooling after breakfast. The steam kettle sits with its stuck valve that you've learned to manage by feel. You stand at the prep table. The inventory clipboard is in your hands. Not because you're reading it, just because it's the thing you hold in this kitchen. The walk-in cooler has enough for today's meals. Lunch will be rice and whatever the vegetable stores can produce. Dinner will be whatever remains after that. Maybe 60 people tonight. You'll cook for them. April 1945. The last residents of Manzanar leave. The camp closes officially on November 21st, 1945, after the war ends. But the practical work, the daily work of feeding people, of making the rice right, of stretching 45 cents across a meal that means something, that ends months earlier in the small accumulation of departures. You are one of the last. You leave on April 3rd, 1945, with Tommy Cato and his mother on a bus to Los Angeles. The bus leaves in the early morning. You watch the mountains from the window as the bus drives south. The Sierra Nevada are still snow-covered in the high reaches. The morning light comes from the east, from over the Inyo Range, and it illuminates the peaks from the right side, which is different from the afternoon light, which came from the west. You've seen these mountains in every light there is. The bus reaches the edge of the valley. The mountains fall behind you. Los Angeles, 1945. The house in Boyle Heights is rented to a different family. You stay with your cousin in East Los Angeles. Your parents return from Salt Lake City in June, when your father's work there concludes, and they're ready to begin again. Tadashi comes home in October. He walks with a slight limp from a wound he was given in France that he doesn't discuss much. He is 20 years old, and he has seen things that make him quiet in ways that take years to understand. But he comes home. Mrs. Tanaka was right about that. You don't cook professionally again, not immediately. You go back to office work, which you're still good at, and the typing is still fast, and the secretarial work is what puts food on the table while the family finds its footing. But you cook at home. Your mother notices this. The specific attention you bring to it, the calibration of water to rice, the altitude adjustment that you still make by reflex, even though Los Angeles is at sea level and the adjustment is 0. You cook differently, she says one evening. I had a good teacher. More than one, she says. She's right. Here's what you learnt in the kitchen at Manzanar. Not just the cooking, not just the altitude ratio and the mushroom water and the soybean broth, and the trick with the powdered eggs and the miso paste. You learned that feeding people is one of the fundamental human acts, not in a grand way, not in a way that requires ceremony or acknowledgement, in a daily, repeated, physically demanding, often under-resourced way. You learned that the person who makes the food is visible in the food, whether anyone knows it or not. The slightly domed rice communicates something. The onigiri that hold together communicate something. The soup on the week of the loyalty questionnaire, richer than usual, without explanation. The person who made it is in it. You learned that a kitchen can be a place where something is preserved, that the forces outside it are trying to erase, where identity and dignity and care are maintained in small acts, below the threshold of political significance, below the threshold of history, below the threshold of a lot of things that turn out to matter less. The mountains are still there. If you drove back to the Owens Valley today, the Sierra Nevada would look the same as they looked from Block 7, from the secondary perimeter fence, from the window of the bus on the morning of April 3rd, 1945. 400 million years of rock above 10,000 feet, permanent snow in the high reaches, birds circling the peaks in the afternoon thermals. The camp buildings are gone, mostly. There's a monument now, and a small museum, and visitors come and stand in the dust and read the plaques. The dust is the same, the alkaline dust of the old lake bed, fine as flour, that got into the rice. Some things about a place don't change, but this is what I want you to hold as you're here, right now. 300 people walk through a mess hall line in the morning. They held their trays with both hands. They received their rice and their soup and their small scoop of pickled vegetables, and they went and sat and ate. They came in tired and cold and carrying the weight of what had been done to them. They came in worried about the questionnaire, about the people they'd left behind, about the war, about the future, about whether any of this would be set right. And someone on the other side of the counter had gotten up at 4:15 in the cold dark and walked across the open ground and started the rice, had paid attention to the water ratio, had adjusted for the altitude, had made it right. Not because the government required it to be right, not because anyone would notice if it was wrong, because the people who were going to eat it were worth the attention. That is what Mrs. Tanaka knew. That is what she taught, without saying it in those words, every morning for 3 years. You take care of what's in front of you. You make the rice right. That's the first rule, and also the last rule, and also everything in between. It's late now, or early, whatever hour this is. The sounds of your life are quieter than the sounds of that mess hall at 6:30 in the morning, when 300 people came in out of the cold desert air, quieter than the wind off the Sierra Nevada, quieter than the stuck valve on the steam kettle, which always made that specific sound, somewhere between a hiss and a knock, when you hit it right with the heel of your hand. You don't have anything you need to do tonight. Nobody needs you to start the rice. Let that be enough. Let the things you've been carrying today get a little lighter. The obligations and the decisions and the things that didn't go the way they should have. Let them do what heavy things do when you stop holding them up. Let them settle. You are warm enough, safe enough, still enough. The cook in Block 7 used to say that a meal is just a meal until someone makes it with attention, and then it becomes something else, something that goes somewhere. That lasts, in the people who received it, longer than the meal itself. What was given to you today, in whatever form it came, the cup of something hot, the conversation that helped, the moment of unexpected kindness. Let it last past tonight. Let it do its work, and the things you gave today, the attention you brought to something, the small act of care, seen or unseen, recorded or forgotten, that went somewhere too. Let yourself rest. The mountains are still there, all 400 million years of them. They'll be there tomorrow. The rice will start again before dawn. But right now, in this moment, in this particular quiet, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to carry anything. Just this. The slowing of a long day into rest. The warmth that is already here. The breath that is already steady. You've earned this. Take it. Let the sounds of wherever you are do what the sounds of the Owens Valley did at the end of a long shift. Fade into the background of something softer. Something that isn't asking anything of you. Let your hands uncurl. Let your shoulders drop. Let the floor hold you. Because it will. You are warm enough. Quiet enough. Done enough for today. The rice can wait. Sleep now. Good night.